The sound wasn't loud. It was dry. Snap. The cheap metal clasp broke. The small golden swan tumbled from Bella's polyester blazer, spinning in slow motion before hitting the Italian marble of the Sterling Grand Hotel lobby. Clink. The sound of metal hitting stone echoed like a gunshot in the awkward silence. Victoria Sterling didn't look at the floor. She kept her chin high, her icy blue eyes locked on the pale face of the intern. Victoria held a pure white silk handkerchief in her right hand. With slow, surgical movements, she began to wipe the tips of her fingers, the exact spot where she had touched Bella's lapel seconds before. "I told you, Isabella!" Victoria's voice was a velvet whisper, but it cut like broken glass. "We serve royalty here. Senators, oil tycoons. The Sterling image is immaculate." Victoria finished wiping her fingers. She let go of the handkerchief. The white silk floated down, landing softly on top of the broken brooch, like a shroud covering a corpse or trash. "This," Victoria pointed a sharp stiletto heel at the fallen swan. "This dime store jewelry, it offends my brand. It smells of desperation." Bella felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands trembled at her sides. She was 19. This blazer was the only one she owned. That brooch. That brooch was the last thing her grandmother had pressed into her hand before dying in the state ward. Around them, the lobby froze. A VIP couple, carrying Hermes bags, stopped to watch. The man adjusted his glasses. The woman gave a tight, amused smirk as if she were watching a bad play. No one moved to help. Bella knelt. The marble was freezing against her knees. She reached out to grab the brooch. Her fingers brushed against Victoria's silk handkerchief. "Don't touch it," Victoria commanded. Bella froze. She looked up. Victoria looked like an ice sculpture under the light of the 10-foot crystal chandelier. "Security," Victoria said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look back. She knew they would come. Two men in dark suits stepped out from the shadows of the Doric columns. They were large, impersonal. They didn't look at Bella like a person, they looked at her like a stain on the Persian rug. "Remove the debris from my lobby," Victoria said, turning her back and walking toward the reception desk, where a vase of white orchids looked slightly askew. She began to arrange the flowers, completely ignoring the girl kneeling behind her. "And throw her bag out first. I don't want her dragging the smell of poverty into the service elevator." One of the guards grabbed Bella's arm. It wasn't gentle. His fingers dug into her bicep hard enough to leave bruises by morning. "Get up," the man grunted. Bella didn't fight. She closed her fist around the broken brooch and Victoria's silk handkerchief. She stood up, her legs shaking. They marched her, not to the back exit, to the main revolving doors of glass and gold. The humiliation had to be public. It had to be a show. If you've ever felt the sting of injustice, if you want to see Bella rise from this, press the like button and subscribe right now. Let's show the world that dignity fights back. The guard shoved the revolving door. The heavy glass began to spin. Bella was pushed out. The thermal shock was instant. Inside, the air was warm, smelling of lilies and old money. Outside, the world was collapsing in water. The November storm punished the concrete sidewalk. The rain was a gray, freezing curtain. The wind howled between the skyscrapers, cutting Bella's thin skin like invisible razors. She stumbled on the wet curb. Her old loafer slipped on the oily gutter. Splash! She fell to her knees in the dirty water. The cold mud soaked her skirt instantly. Seconds later, her canvas bag flew through the revolving door, landing open in a puddle. Her notebooks, her pens, the laminated photo of her mother. Everything was soaked in seconds. Bella stayed there, kneeling in the rain. The water ran down her hair, plastering the strands to her face, mixing with the hot tears that finally began to fall. She looked back through the golden-lit glass of the hotel. Inside, the world was warm, dry, safe. She saw Victoria Sterling laughing with the VIP couple. Victoria was holding a champagne flute now. The crystal sparkled. She didn't even glance at the window. To her, Bella had ceased to exist the moment she crossed the threshold. Bella looked down at her clenched fist. The rain was washing the dirt from the ground, but it couldn't wash away the shame. She slowly opened her fingers. In her palm, the golden swan was headless. The metal had bent in the fall. The gold was peeling, revealing the ugly gray zinc underneath. But the eye of the swan, a tiny chip of red glass, was still there. Bella closed her hand again. She squeezed so hard the jagged metal edges cut her skin. The blood mixed with the rain. She didn't scream. She didn't bang on the glass, begging to be let back in. She stood up. Water dripped from her cheap clothes, forming a pool at her feet. She picked up her soaked bag. She hugged it to her chest like a shield. Bella looked one last time at the golden S above the entrance. One of the bulbs flickered and died. She turned toward the darkness of the empty street and began to walk. Every step was heavy. Every step hurt, but she didn't stop. The sound of her wet shoes on the pavement created a new rhythm. Squish, squish. It wasn't the sound of defeat. It was the sound of a clock starting to count down. Tick-tock, Victoria. Tick-tock. You have ever been humiliated by someone who thought they were better than you? Someone who treated your dignity like dirt on their shoe? Type yes in the comments if you believe the world turns and no one stays on top forever. 10 years. Time is a cruel architect. Rule. It doesn't just age things, it erodes them. The golden letters of the Sterling Grand Hotel were still there, mounted above the entrance. But the S, the symbol of Victoria's pride, was hanging loose, held by a single rusted bolt. It swung slightly in the wind. Creak, creak. It was the sound of a kingdom falling apart. Inside the lobby, the 10-foot crystal chandelier, the same one that had witnessed Bella's humiliation, was dark. Half the bulbs were burnt out. A thick layer of gray dust coated the crystals like a shroud. Victoria Sterling sat behind the massive mahogany reception desk. There were no receptionists left. No concierge. Just her. She slammed the phone receiver down. The plastic cracked slightly against the base. "Do not talk to me about liquidity issues," she shouted at the silence. The call had ended 10 seconds ago, but she was still arguing. Her chest heaved. She looked down at her hands. Her manicure was still red, still sharp, but her cuticles were dry and cracked. She adjusted the collar of her Chanel blazer. It was a vintage piece now. Not because she collected vintage, but because she hadn't bought anything new in 3 seasons. The fabric was thinning at the elbows. A piece of paper lay on the polished mahogany desk. It wasn't a guest list. It wasn't a reservation. Notice of foreclosure. The red stamp looked like a wound on the white paper. Victoria stared at it. Her reflection in the dark wood of the desk looked tired. The lines around her mouth were deep, etched by a decade of frowning. She grabbed the paper. She crumpled it into a tight ball, her knuckles turning white. She threw it toward the wastebasket. It missed. The paper ball rolled across the floor, stopping near a dark coffee stain on the carpet that she couldn't afford to clean. "They can't take this," she whispered, her voice bouncing off the empty walls. "I am the Sterling Grand." The silence of the hotel wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It pressed against her ears. There was no piano music, no laughter, just the aggressive hum of a dying refrigerator in the empty lobby bar. Victoria stood up. She walked around the desk to the center of the lobby. "Housekeeping!" she barked. Her voice echoed. No one came running. "Leo, where is the doorman?" Nothing. Just the wind rattling the glass doors. She walked to the window. The velvet curtains were faded from the sun. She pulled one back, sending a cloud of dust motes dancing into the stale air. She coughed, waving her hand in front of her face. She looked out at the driveway. Weeds were growing through the cracks in the pavement, green and stubborn. "I just need one buyer," she muttered to herself, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. "One investor with taste, someone who understands legacy." She closed her eyes. For a moment, she could almost hear the ghosts of the past, the clinking of champagne glasses, the applause of the senators. But when she opened her eyes, there was only the empty street and the rusted S swinging above her head. Then a sound cut through the decay. It wasn't the wind, it was the low, powerful purr of an engine. Victoria's eyes snapped open. A black SUV turned into the driveway, then another. Then a third. They were massive, armored. The sunlight glinted off their polished black metal like oil. They moved in perfect formation, slow and predatory, circling the shipwreck of her hotel. Victoria gasped. She smoothed her skirt with trembling hands. She licked her teeth to check for lipstick stains. "They're here," she breathed. She turned to the empty lobby, adrenaline flushing her pale cheeks. "Look alive!" she yelled to the ghosts. "The Olympus Group is here!" She forced her face into a mask. She pulled the corners of her mouth up. The smile she plastered on wasn't happy, it was hungry. This was the lifeline. This was the money. She had no idea that the car didn't contain a savior. It contained a mirror. And mirrors don't lie. The lead SUV didn't just stop, it arrived. The tires, thick and polished with tire shine, crunched over the weeds poking through the hotel's driveway. They ground the neglect into the asphalt. Crunch. The engine cut. Silence descended. It wasn't the empty silence of the abandoned hotel. It was a heavy, expectant silence. The kind that comes before a judge reads a verdict. Inside the lobby, Victoria Sterling was moving. She wasn't walking with her usual slow, gliding grace. She was scrambling. She rushed to the revolving door, her heels slipping slightly on the dusty marble. She caught her reflection in the glass. Her hair was slightly frizzy from the humidity. She smoothed it down frantically, her hands shaking so hard she nearly poked herself in the eye. "Open the door," she whispered to herself. "Open the damn door." She pressed her shoulder against the brass bar of the revolving door. It was heavy. Without the doorman to grease the mechanism or push the button, it resisted. Victoria had to shove, grunting with exertion. She stumbled out onto the sidewalk just as the rear door of the middle SUV opened. Victoria froze. She clasped her hands in front of her waist, assuming the hostess position. It was a pose she had perfected over 30 years. Chin up, shoulders back, smile wide enough to show teeth, but not gums. A man stepped out first. He was massive. His suit was so well-tailored it struggled to contain the muscle underneath. He wore an earpiece that coiled down his neck like a plastic snake. He didn't look at Victoria. He scanned the perimeter, the roof, the street, the windows. He was assessing threats. Victoria wasn't a threat. She was scenery. The man turned and held the car door open. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of submission. Victoria held her breath. First, a boot touched the cracked pavement. It wasn't a practical shoe, it was a statement. Black leather, polished to a mirror shine, with a heel sharp enough to puncture a lung. The sole was red, unmistakable. Then, the leg followed, clad in black silk trousers that flowed like water. Finally, the woman emerged. She stood to her full height. She was tall, imposing. She wore a camel-colored cashmere trench coat that looked soft enough to melt. The belt was cinched tight, emphasizing a waist that spoke of discipline. On her head, a wide-brimmed felt hat tilted dangerously low, obscuring her forehead, and over her eyes, oversized blackout sunglasses. Victoria couldn't see the eyes. She could only see her own distorted reflection in the black lenses. She looked small, desperate. The woman didn't move toward the hotel. She stood by the car, adjusting her black leather gloves. She pulled the leather tight over each finger. Snap, snap. Victoria couldn't handle the silence. She stepped forward, her voice pitching an octave too high. "Welcome, welcome to the Sterling Grand." Victoria extended her hand. It was a reflex, a demand for acknowledgement. The woman didn't take it. She didn't even look at the hand. She turned her head slowly, surveying the facade of the building. She looked at the peeling paint on the columns. She looked at the dead ivy clinging to the brickwork like dry veins. Victoria slowly lowered her hand, her smile twitching. She felt foolish, like a child waving at a parade float that had already passed. "I am Victoria Sterling," she tried again, stepping closer, invading the woman's personal space. "I assume you are the representative from the Olympus Group. I've been expecting you. I have the papers ready. The transition team is on standby." There was no transition team, just Arthur, the night janitor, hiding in the basement. The woman finally turned to face Victoria. The sunglasses stared. "Miss Sterling," the woman said. The voice stopped Victoria's heart for a beat. It was low, smoky. It sounded familiar, but the tone was wrong. It was cold, detached, stripping away all warmth. It was the voice of a bank vault closing. "Yes, that's me," Victoria beamed, relieved to be recognized. "Please, come inside. The wind is terrible out here. It ruins the hair." The woman didn't smile. She walked past Victoria as if she were a potted plant. Her scent trailed behind her. Victoria inhaled. She expected heavy floral perfume, something old and powdery. Instead, she smelled sandalwood, crisp rain, and something metallic. It was an expensive, intimidating smell. It smelled like power. The bodyguard stepped in behind the woman, forcing Victoria to scurry to catch up. She had to jog a few steps in her heels to get ahead of them. "Right this way. Mind the step," Victoria chattered nervously. They entered the lobby. The transition from the bright afternoon sun to the dim interior was jarring. The lobby felt like a tomb. The air was stale, recycled too many times. The woman stopped in the dead center of the room. She stood on the exact square of marble where, 10 years ago, a terrified girl had knelt to pick up a broken brooch. The woman looked down at her feet. She tapped the toe of her boot against the floor. Tap, tap. Then she looked up at the chandelier. "It's dark," the woman said. "Efficiency." Victoria lied quickly, wringing her hands. "We are currently upgrading the electrical grid to be more green, eco-friendly, very trendy right now." The woman walked slowly toward the reception desk. Victoria felt a spike of panic. The desk was a mess. Papers, the crumpled foreclosure notice, her empty coffee cup. The woman stopped at the desk. She didn't look at the papers. She looked at the wood. Slowly, deliberately, the woman raised her right hand. She was still wearing the black leather glove. She ran her index finger along the edge of the mahogany counter. It was a long, slow drag. Victoria watched, mesmerized. The woman lifted her finger. She turned her hand so Victoria could see. The tip of the black leather glove was coated in a thick gray smear of dust. The silence stretched. It became physical. It choked the air. The woman didn't speak. She didn't have to. She brought her thumb to her index finger and rubbed the dust. Rub, rub. It was the exact same motion Victoria had used with the silk handkerchief 10 years ago. Victoria felt a shiver crawl up her spine. She didn't know why. It was just dust. But the gesture, it felt like a ghost touching her neck. "The cleaning crew is transitioning," Victoria stammered, her face flushing red. "Hard to find good help these days, you know how it is. They want money, but they don't want to work. They don't have pride in their craft anymore." The woman stared at the dust on her glove. "Pride," the woman repeated. The word hung in the air. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a pristine white tissue. She wiped the dust from her glove with slow, agonizing precision. She dropped the tissue on the floor. It landed at Victoria's feet. "Shall we tour the asset?" the woman asked. She put her hand back in her pocket. "I have a schedule to keep, and I don't like wasting time on dead things." Victoria looked at the tissue on the floor. Her instinct was to scream, "Pick that up! Do you know who I am?" But she couldn't scream. She needed the money. She needed the signature. Victoria swallowed her pride. It tasted like bile. "Of course," Victoria said, her voice tight. "The asset is magnificent. Wait until you see the ballroom. It has history." "I'm sure it does," the woman said. She turned away from the desk. As she turned, the light from the door caught the side of her face. For a second, Victoria saw the line of her jaw, tight, clenched. "Lead the way, Ms. Sterling," the woman commanded. She didn't walk beside Victoria. She walked 2 steps behind her. Victoria started walking toward the grand staircase, her heels clicking rapidly, filling the empty space with nervous noise. Click, clack, click, clack. Behind her, the woman walked silently. Her expensive soles absorbed the sound. She moved like a predator stalking prey that didn't even know it was being hunted. She thinks she's given a tour, the woman thought behind her dark glasses. She has no idea she's walking to her execution. The double doors of the grand ballroom groaned as Victoria pushed them open. The hinges screamed in protest, a high-pitched shriek of rusted metal that echoed through the cavernous room. "Screech!" "As I said," Victoria shouted over the noise, trying to maintain her smile. "Authenticity. We kept the original hardware. It adds character." They stepped inside. The ballroom was vast. Once it had been the jewel of the city. Now it smelled of wet wool and forgotten dreams. The velvet curtains, originally a deep royal burgundy, had faded to a sickly pink where the sun hit them. Isabella walked to the center of the dance floor. Her boot heels clicked on the parquet wood. Click, click, click. She stopped. She looked up. High above, on the frescoed ceiling painted with cherubs and clouds, a dark, ugly stain was spreading. It looked like a bruise. Drip. A single drop of water fell from the ceiling. It landed on the floor 5 feet from Isabella, splashing into a small puddle that had already formed. Drip. Isabella slowly pulled a small black leather notebook from her trench coat pocket. She produced a silver fountain pen. She didn't look at Victoria. She looked at the puddle. She uncapped the pen. The sound was sharp. She wrote a single line. Victoria watched the pen moving. Sweat began to prickle under her vintage Chanel collar. "A minor plumbing issue!" Victoria waved her hand dismissively, her bracelets jangling. "We had a storm last night. The roof is solid, I assure you. I have a contractor coming tomorrow. It's purely cosmetic." Isabella stopped writing. She looked at Victoria over the rim of her sunglasses. "Cosmetic," Isabella repeated. Her voice was flat, like putting lipstick on a corpse. Victoria's smile faltered. Her left eye twitched. "You have a very direct way of speaking," Victoria said, forcing a laugh. "I like that. It reminds me of myself. You have to be tough in this business. You can't let things slide." Isabella turned away from the puddle. "Show me the back of house." Victoria froze. "The back of house? The kitchens? The service corridors? Oh, you don't want to see that. It's chaotic. The staff are in the middle of the back of house," Isabella interrupted. She didn't raise her voice. She just dropped the temperature of the room by 10 degrees. "I need to see the bones, Ms. Sterling, not just the makeup." Victoria swallowed hard. "Right this way." They left the ballroom and walked down a side corridor. The plush carpet ended abruptly, replaced by scuffed gray linoleum. The crystal sconces on the walls were replaced by buzzing fluorescent tubes. The air here was different. It smelled of industrial bleach and old grease. Victoria walked faster here, as if she wanted to run through the poverty of her own building. She kept checking her reflection in the dark windows of the swing doors. "I run a tight ship," Victoria said, her voice echoing in the narrow hallway. "My staff knows their place. They know that working at the Sterling Grand is a privilege, not a right. I don't tolerate mistakes." They reached a heavy metal door marked "Exit." Next to it was a small, cramped area with a time clock and a row of gray lockers. Isabella stopped. She stared at the lockers. They were dented. One of them had a sticker peeling off. Isabella reached out and touched the metal of locker number 104. Her hand lingered there. Her black leather glove traced the number. Victoria noticed the pause. She mistook it for interest in her management style. She saw an opportunity to brag, to show this wealthy investor that she was a strong leader. Victoria walked over and leaned against the wall, crossing her arms. "See this spot?" Victoria gestured to the ugly gray hallway. "This is where I handle the garbage." Isabella didn't turn around. Her hand was still on locker 104. "Garbage?" Isabella asked softly. "The bad apples," Victoria clarified, feeling confident now. 10 years ago, right in this hallway, I caught a girl, an intern, a little rat named, I forget her name, Bella, I think. Isabella's fingers curled into a fist against the locker door. The leather of her glove creaked. "What did she do?" Isabella asked. Victoria laughed. It was a cruel, performative sound. "She was a thief," Victoria lied. The lie hung in the air, toxic and heavy. "A thief?" Isabella turned slowly. "Oh, absolutely," Victoria nodded, warming to her story. "She stole jewelry from a guest, a brooch. Tacky little thing, but still. Theft is theft. She tried to deny it, of course. Cried, begged, said it was hers." Victoria rolled her eyes. "They always cry, don't they? Using pity as a weapon. But I don't do pity. Pity is expensive." Isabella took a step toward Victoria. The bodyguard behind her tensed, his hand twitching toward his jacket. Isabella signaled him to stand down with a tiny flick of her finger. "So," Isabella said, her voice dangerously quiet. "What did you do?" Victoria smiled. It was the smile of a predator remembering a kill. "I didn't just fire her. I made an example of her. I marched her out the front door, through the lobby, in front of everyone." Victoria pantomimed a shoving motion with her hands. "It was raining that night, a terrible storm. I threw her bag into the gutter, then I threw her out after it. She looked like a drowned rat shivering on the sidewalk." Victoria laughed again. "I made sure she never worked in this city again. I blackened her name in every hotel registry within 50 miles. You have to weed out the weak, right? To protect the strong?" Isabella stared at Victoria. Under the sunglasses, Isabella's eyes were burning. She remembered that night. She remembered the cold, She remembered the hunger that followed because no one would hire the thief from the Sterling Grand. She remembered sleeping in a bus station for 3 nights because she couldn't pay rent. Victoria was still smiling, waiting for approval, waiting for the rich investor to say, "Good job." Isabella opened her notebook again. She pressed the pen hard against the paper. Scritch. Weeding out the weak, Isabella repeated. "I admire your memory, Ms. Sterling." "I have a mind like a steel trap," Victoria beamed, tapping her temple with a manicured nail. "I never forget a face, and I never forget a mistake." Isabella closed the notebook. Snap. "Good," Isabella said. She stepped closer, invading Victoria's personal space until she could smell the stale coffee on Victoria's breath. "Because neither do I." Isabella turned on her heel, her trench coat swirling around her legs like a cape. "I've seen enough," Isabella said, walking back toward the guest area. "Let's go to the boardroom. I'm ready to sign." Victoria pumped her fist in the air silently behind Isabella's back. She had done it. She had impressed the buyer. She had shown strength. "Excellent!" Victoria chirped, trotting after her. "I have the champagne on ice, the vintage Dom Perignon." She didn't have Dom Perignon. She had a bottle of sparkling wine she had bought at the gas station an hour ago and poured into a crystal decanter. But Victoria Sterling believed her own lies. That was her superpower, and that would be her doom. Isabella walked ahead, her face set in stone. She wasn't walking to a business meeting. She was walking to a sentencing hearing. Wait until she sees the signature. Wait until the mask comes off. If you are waiting for that moment of justice, don't look away. The checkmate is coming. The boardroom was freezing. It was the kind of artificial cold that smelled of lemon polish, ozone, and aggressive air conditioning. In the center of the room sat a long table made of black glass. It looked less like furniture and more like a frozen lake waiting to crack. Victoria Sterling walked in first. She was vibrating with adrenaline. She moved to the sideboard where a crystal decanter sat on a silver tray. "Champagne," Victoria offered, her back to Isabella. "It's the '98 Dom Perignon. I saved it for a special occasion." It wasn't Dom Perignon. It was a $15 bottle of sparkling wine she had sent a bellboy to buy at a convenience store an hour ago. She had poured it into the crystal decanter to hide the label. Victoria's hand shook as she lifted the heavy glass stopper. Clink. The sound of glass against glass betrayed her nerves. She poured 2 flutes. The bubbles fizzed aggressively, too large and too fast for vintage champagne. She turned around, a flute in each hand, a practiced smile plastered on her face. Isabella was standing at the head of the table. She hadn't sat down. She hadn't taken off her coat. She hadn't taken off her sunglasses. "I don't drink," Isabella said. She didn't move to take the glass. Victoria froze. She was left holding both glasses, feeling foolish. "Oh, of course. Very disciplined. I admire that." Victoria set the glasses down on the black table. One of them sloshed over the rim, leaving a sticky puddle on the pristine surface. Victoria sat down in the leather chair at the head of the table. The leather squeaked loudly. Squeak! She placed her hands on the table to stop them from trembling. Between them lay the contract. A thick stack of papers bound with a black clip. The death certificate of the Sterling ownership and the birth certificate of Victoria's freedom. "It's a standard acquisition agreement," Victoria said, talking too fast. "I've kept the staff lean, efficient. You won't have to fire anyone because, well, there's almost no one left to fire." Isabella stood perfectly still. The fluorescent lights reflected off her black sunglasses. She was unreadable, a monolith. "Sign," Isabella said. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Victoria reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her pen. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and gold-plated, the last remnant of her father's fortune. She uncapped it. She looked at the signature line, Seller, Victoria Sterling. She hesitated. Just for a heartbeat, this was it. The end of her reign, but also the end of the nightmare. The millions she owed to the banks would vanish. The creditors who called her house at 3 a.m. would stop. She would be rich again. She could move to Paris. She could start over. She pressed the nib to the paper. Scritch, scratch. The sound of the pen was loud in the silent room. She signed her name with a flourish, a jagged, desperate signature. Victoria exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that emptied her lungs. She pushed the papers across the black glass toward the woman. The stack slid smoothly, stopping inches from Isabella's hand. "There," Victoria said, leaning back. Her arrogance began to inflate again, like a balloon filling with toxic gas. Now that the danger was past, the Queen returned. "It's done. You've got yourself a hell of a building." Isabella didn't move to sign. She didn't pick up the pen. Victoria laughed nervously. The silence was stretching too long. "You know, it's funny," Victoria continued, unable to stop talking. "Walking through the halls today, it reminded me of why I do this, why I kept the rabble out, why I was so hard on people." Victoria gestured vaguely between herself and the silent woman. "People like us. We are the guardians of taste. If we let just anyone in, the whole world turns gray. We have a duty to maintain standards." Isabella's head tilted slightly to the right. "People like us," Isabella repeated. Her voice was devoid of emotion. "Exactly," Victoria beamed, feeling a connection. She leaned forward, conspiratorial. "High standards. That's why I'm glad it's you. I was terrified the bank would sell it to some new money trash, some lottery winner with no class. But I can tell. You have breeding. You understand heritage." Isabella slowly raised her hands. She reached for the brim of her hat. She lifted it. She placed the hat on the glass table. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. Her forehead was smooth, unlined. Then she reached for her sunglasses. Victoria watched, mesmerized. She wanted to see the eyes of her savior. She wanted to see the approval in them. Isabella pulled the glasses off. Victoria blinked. The eyes staring back at her were dark, intelligent, and cold. Unimaginably cold. They were familiar. Victoria felt a pinch of confusion in her stomach. "Have we met at a gala?" she thought. "Is she a cousin of the Rockefellers?" But it wasn't the eyes that stopped Victoria's heart. Isabella stood up. She reached for the belt of her trench coat. She untied it with a single, fluid motion. She shrugged the heavy cashmere coat off her shoulders. It fell onto the chair behind her like a discarded skin. Underneath, Isabella wore a tailored black dress, simple, severe, expensive. But pinned to the left lapel, right over her heart, was an object that caught every photon of light in the room. It was a swan. But it wasn't the chipped paint and fake gold from 10 years ago. It was paved in diamonds. Hundreds of tiny, flawless stones glittered fiercely under the harsh boardroom lights. The neck of the swan was a curve of white fire. The wings were intricate layers of platinum and ice, and the eye of the swan was a single, deep red ruby. It burned like a live coal. Victoria's mouth opened. No sound came out. Her brain tried to reject what she was seeing. It was a glitch in her reality. The brooch, the intern, the rain. Isabella saw the recognition hit Victoria. She watched the color drain from the older woman's face, leaving it gray and pasty. Isabella reached up. She touched the diamond swan with her bare fingers. "You said it smelled of desperation." Isabella said. Her voice wasn't velvet anymore. It was a razor blade. Victoria pushed her chair back. It screeched violently against the floor. Screech! No, Victoria whispered. Her voice was trembling. That's impossible. You told me my brooch offended your brand, Isabella said, walking slowly around the table. Click, click, click. The sound of her heels was a countdown. Bella? Victoria choked on the name. The intern? Isabella stopped right next to Victoria's chair. She loomed over her. She smelled of sandalwood and justice. Isabella, she corrected. Ms. Valmont to you. Victoria looked down at the papers on the table. The signature was still wet. But I signed, Victoria stammered, grasping at straws. You're buying the hotel. You're the Olympus Group. We have a deal. The Olympus Group specializes in distressed assets, Isabella said softly. Specifically, debt purchasing. Isabella reached down. She picked up the contract Victoria had just signed. She didn't take the pen. She took the paper in both hands. Rip! The sound of the thick paper tearing was violent. It sounded like a bone breaking. Isabella tore the front page in half. Then she tore it again. She let the pieces flutter down onto the black glass table like confetti. I didn't buy the hotel from you, Victoria. I bought your loans from the bank 3 months ago. Isabella leaned down, her face inches from Victoria's. Victoria could see the pores in Isabella's skin. She could see the absolute lack of mercy in her eyes. I own the mortgage. I own the liens. I own the arrears. Isabella's voice dropped to a whisper that roared in Victoria's ears. I don't need to buy the building from you. I'm foreclosing on it. Today. Victoria grabbed the edge of the table. The room was spinning. The lemon polish smell was making her nauseous. Foreclosing? No, you can't. I have rights. This is my legacy. Your legacy. Isabella straightened up. She walked to the corner of the room. There, resting on the floor in the shadows, was a cardboard box. It was old. The flaps were bent. It looked wet, stained with watermarks that had dried years ago. It was a cheap, ugly box. Isabella picked it up. She walked back to the table. She didn't hand it to Victoria. She dropped it. Thud. The empty box landed on the black glass right in front of Victoria. This is your legacy, Isabella said. Victoria looked at the box. It was the same size as the one Bella had carried out into the rain 10 years ago. You have 5 minutes, Isabella said, checking a diamond watch on her wrist. Take your personal items. Leave the company property. If you take a single stapler, I will have you arrested for theft. You can't do this, Victoria screamed, her composure finally shattering. She stood up, knocking her chair over. Bang! I am Victoria Sterling. My name is on the building. You were a nothing, a rat I threw in the gutter. Isabella didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just touched the ruby eye of the swan brooch. The gutter is exactly where I learned how to survive, Victoria. And do you know what I learned about people like you? Isabella smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. You break the moment you don't get your way. Isabella pressed a button on the intercom phone on the table. Mr. Henderson, you can come in now. The double doors opened, and the person who walked in wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't a banker. It was the final nail in the coffin. If you think Victoria deserves what is about to happen, hit that like button. Because the person walking through that door is about to deliver the final humiliation. The double doors of the boardroom didn't just open. They swung wide, pushed by a hand that knew exactly how much force was needed. Victoria Sterling spun around, her chest heaving, ready to scream at a lawyer or a security team. But the figure standing in the doorway wasn't wearing a tactical vest. He wasn't wearing an Italian suit. He was wearing gray polyester. The fabric was worn at the elbows. A ring of keys hung from his belt loop, jingling softly, jingle, jingle. It was Arthur. He was 62 years old. His back was permanently curved from 40 years of mopping floors. His hands were thick, the knuckles swollen from arthritis and bleach. He stood in the doorway of the boardroom, a room he had cleaned 1,000 times but had never been allowed to enter while the lights were on. Victoria stared at him. Her brain stuttered. "Arthur?" she whispered. The name tasted foreign in her mouth. She barely used it. To her, he was just maintenance, or hey, you. Arthur didn't look at the floor. For the first time in 10 years, he looked directly at her. His eyes were tired, but they weren't scared. He stepped into the room. He walked onto the plush carpet. He didn't wipe his feet. "Ms. Valmont," Arthur said. His voice was gravelly, unused to speaking at this volume. He nodded respectfully to Isabella. Isabella returned the nod. It wasn't a nod to a servant. It was a nod to a partner. "Thank you for coming up." "Arthur," Isabella said. "Ms. Sterling is having some trouble understanding the new organizational chart." Isabella turned to Victoria. The diamond swan on her lapel caught the light, sending a fractured rainbow across Victoria's pale face. "Victoria," Isabella said, gesturing to the man in the gray uniform. "Meet your eviction officer." Victoria let out a short, hysterical laugh. It sounded like a bark. "This is a joke," Victoria said, looking back and forth between them. "This is some kind of sick, twisted joke. You're going to have the janitor escort me out?" "Mr. Henderson is not the janitor anymore," Isabella corrected calmly. She walked over to the black glass table. She picked up the heavy brass master key that lay next to the torn contract. She held it out to Arthur. Arthur reached out. His calloused hand engulfed the shiny brass key. "Mr. Henderson," Isabella continued, her voice echoing in the silent room, "is the new building manager. He knows every pipe, every wire, and every skeleton in these walls. He knows where the roof leaks. He knows which vendors you stiffed. He is the only person in this building qualified to save it from your neglect." Victoria's knees gave way. She slumped back against the credenza, knocking over the crystal decanter stopper. Clack! It rolled on the floor, spinning wildly before coming to a rest against Arthur's work boot. "You can't be serious," Victoria gasped. She looked at Isabella, her eyes wide and wet. The anger was draining away, replaced by a cold, oily terror. "Isabella, look at me." Victoria took a step forward. She held out her hands, palms up, the universal gesture of a beggar. "I get it," Victoria said, her voice trembling. "You're angry. You wanted to make a point. Message received. Okay? You won. You bought the debt. Bravo!" She forced a smile. It was grotesque, stretching her skin too tight. "But let's be adults. Let's be businesswomen. You can't run this place. You don't know the vendors. You don't know the clientele. The Senator's Gala is next month. If you cancel it, the brand dies." Victoria pointed a shaking finger at Arthur. "He can't run a gala. Look at him. He smells like ammonia." Arthur didn't flinch. He just stood there, holding the key, watching her unravel. Isabella didn't look at Arthur. She kept her eyes on Victoria. "The Senator's Gala has been canceled," Isabella said. Victoria's jaw dropped. "What?" "I canceled it this morning," Isabella said. "I refunded the deposit. I told the senator that the ballroom was structurally unsound due to mismanagement." You destroyed the reputation of the hotel?" Victoria shrieked. "Why? Why would you burn your own investment?" "I'm not burning it," Isabella said. I'm fumigating it." Isabella looked at her watch. 3 minutes, Victoria. The countdown hung in the air. Victoria looked around the room. Her eyes darted frantically. She realized, with a sickening thud in her stomach, that there was no negotiation. There was no deal to be made. She looked at the cardboard box on the table, the ugly, wet-stained box. She stumbled toward it. She had to pack. If she didn't pack, they would throw her out with nothing, and she would not leave with nothing. She was Victoria Sterling. She grabbed a silver picture frame from the sideboard. It was a photo of herself shaking hands with the mayor. She threw it into the box. Thud. She grabbed her leather planner. Thud. She reached for the crystal paperweight on the desk. "No," Isabella said. Victoria froze, her hand hovering over the crystal. "That belongs to the hotel," Isabella said. "It was a gift," Victoria spat, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "From my father." "It's listed on the inventory asset sheet under office decor," Isabella said. "If you take it, I will file a police report for larceny. Do you want to leave here in a taxi or a squad car?" Victoria's hand shook violently. She pulled her hand back. She left the paperweight. She looked around for something, anything that was hers. Her lipstick, a half-empty bottle of hand sanitizer, a stress ball. She threw them into the box. Each item looked pathetic against the brown cardboard. She saw the Mont Blanc pen, the gold pen she had used to sign her own death warrant. She reached for it. "The pen!" Arthur spoke up. Victoria whipped her head around. "Excuse me?" she hissed. "The pen," Arthur repeated. His voice was calm. "It was purchased with the company credit card in 2018, invoice number 4T22. I filed the receipt myself." Victoria stared at him. She hated him. She hated him more than she had ever loved anything in her life. She snatched the pen up. For a second, she looked like she was going to stab him with it. She gripped it like a dagger. Isabella took a step forward. She didn't raise her hands. She just intensified her gaze. Victoria let out a sob. A broken, ugly sound. She dropped the pen onto the glass table. Clatter. She grabbed the cardboard box. It was light, humiliatingly light, a 30-year career reduced to 5 pounds of junk. Victoria looked at Isabella one last time. "Where am I supposed to go?" Victoria whispered. Her voice broke. "They took my house. They took my car. This is all I had." Isabella looked at the woman who had thrown her into a storm without a second thought. Isabella remembered the cold. She remembered the water in her shoes. She remembered the feeling of being invisible. Isabella walked to the window. It was a floor-to-ceiling pane of glass overlooking the city. "It's a big city, Victoria," Isabella said, not looking at her. Isabella reached out and tapped the glass. Tap, tap. Outside, the sky had darkened. Gray clouds were gathering again. "And look," Isabella said softly, "it's starting to rain." Victoria looked at the window. The first drops were hitting the glass. Isabella turned back to face her. "I suggest you start walking before the storm gets worse." Victoria hugged the box to her chest. She looked small. The shoulder pads of her vintage blazer seemed to droop. She looked at Arthur. "Arthur," she pleaded, "please, call me a cab. Put it on the account. Just one last time." Arthur looked at the woman who had made him work Christmas Eve for 10 years straight without a bonus. He reached into his pocket. Victoria's eyes lit up. Hope. Arthur pulled out a small, crumpled object. It was a bus token. He placed it gently on the glass table. "The number 4 bus stops at the corner," Arthur said. "It goes to the shelter downtown." Victoria stared at the metal token. It was an insult worse than a slap. She didn't take it. She turned around, clutching her box, and walked toward the door. Her heels didn't click with authority anymore. They dragged. Scuff. Scuff. She walked out of the boardroom. Arthur watched her go. Then he looked at Isabella. "She forgot her bus fare," Arthur said. Isabella didn't smile, but the tension in her shoulders finally released. "She can walk," Isabella said. "It builds character." Isabella walked to the head of the table. She sat down in the leather chair, Victoria's chair. It didn't squeak this time. It accepted her weight. "Arthur," Isabella said. "Yes, Miss Valmont?" "Call the staff. Everyone. The maids, the cooks, the valets, even the ones who aren't on shift." "They're scared, ma'am," Arthur said. "They think you're going to liquidate." Isabella took off her sunglasses. She placed them on the table next to the diamond swan. "Bring them in," Isabella said. "I think it's time we cleared the air." The walk from the boardroom to the elevator was only 50 feet. For Victoria Sterling, it felt like a death march across a tundra. She clutched the cardboard box to her chest. It was awkward. The flaps kept popping open, threatening to spill her pathetic collection of belongings onto the carpet. She reached the elevator. She pressed the button. Nothing happened. She pressed it again, harder. Click, click, click. She realized with a flush of hot shame that she had pressed the button with the entitlement of someone who expected the machine to obey her instantly. The light finally turned on. The doors slid open. Ding! The car was empty. It was lined with mirrors. Victoria stepped in. The doors closed, sealing her in with her worst enemy, herself. She looked at her reflection. The fluorescent light in the elevator was unforgiving. It showed the cracks in her foundation. Her mascara had smudged slightly in the corner of her left eye. Her vintage Chanel blazer, which she had worn like armor for a decade, looked tired. A thread was loose on the shoulder. The numbers above the door began to count down. 20, 19, 18. Each number was a year of her life peeling away. 15, 14. She adjusted the box in her arms. Her biceps were burning. She had never carried a box this far in her life. That's what porters were for. That's what staff was for. 10, 9. "I can fix this," she whispered to the mirror. "I just need a lawyer, a good shark. I'll sue. Wrongful termination, emotional distress." She was bargaining with a reflection that knew she was lying. She didn't have money for a lawyer. She didn't even have money for the bus. 3, 2, lobby. Ding. The doors opened. Victoria took a deep breath. She lifted her chin. She prepared her queen face. She would walk through that lobby with her head high. She would make them wonder if she had resigned to take a better offer. She would own the room one last time. She stepped out and stopped dead. The grand lobby wasn't empty. Word travels faster than light in a hotel. The Bush Telegraph of the service industry is the most efficient communication network on Earth. They were all there. The kitchen staff in their checkered pants and white aprons, stained with tomato sauce and grease. The housekeepers in their gray uniforms, holding bundles of towels. The valets, the bellhops, even the dishwashers, their arms red up to the elbows. They lined the perimeter of the lobby. They stood shoulder to shoulder against the marble walls. 50 people, 50 witnesses. Victoria's heel caught in the carpet. She stumbled, clutching the box to prevent it from falling. She righted herself. She waited for the noise. She expected whispering. She expected giggling. She even expected booing. But there was no noise. There was only silence. A thick, suffocating silence that pressed against her eardrums. They weren't mocking her. They were watching her. It was the indifferent gaze of the statue looking at the pigeon. She didn't matter to them. She wasn't a villain anymore. She was just gone. Victoria walked. Click-clack, click-clack. Her heels sounded ridiculously loud on the marble. She passed Maria, the maid she had fined last week for smiling too much. Victoria slowed down. She looked at Maria, desperate for any reaction. Anger? Sadness? Maria looked through her. Maria was looking at the clock on the wall behind Victoria. Victoria sped up. She passed the front desk. It was empty. The manager on duty sign still had her name on it. She reached the revolving doors, the golden gateway. She waited. Habit is a powerful drug. She stood there for 3 seconds, waiting for Leo, the doorman, to step forward and stop the rotation, to hold the door, to say, "Have a good evening, Miss." Sterling. Leo was there. He was standing by the pillar, his hands clasped behind his back. He was looking at a smudge on the brass railing. He didn't move. Victoria made a small, choked sound in her throat. She realized she had to push. She leaned her shoulder against the brass bar. It was cold. It was heavy. Without the momentum of the motor, which Leo controlled, the door was a dead weight. She shoved. Arrgh! The door groaned. Victoria grunted with effort. She had to use her whole body weight, shoving the box against the glass, scrambling with her feet to get traction. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't regal. It was a struggle. She tumbled out onto the sidewalk. The cold air hit her like a slap. The storm had returned. The rain wasn't a drizzle anymore. It was a deluge. Victoria stood on the concrete. The overhang provided some shelter, but the wind was blowing the rain sideways. She looked at the curb. The reserved for manager spot was empty. Her Mercedes was gone, repossessed weeks ago, though she had pretended it was in the shop. She looked left. She looked right. No taxi, no limo. A city bus roared past, throwing a spray of brown sludge onto the sidewalk. Splat! The mud hit the hem of her skirt. Victoria looked down at the stain. She opened her mouth to scream, to demand to speak to the manager of the city, to fire the weather. But the scream died in her throat. She was just an old woman, holding a wet cardboard box, standing in the rain. She turned up her collar against the wind. She gripped the box tighter, and she began to walk. Not toward a penthouse, toward the bus stop. Behind her, inside the warm, lighted lobby, Leo, the doorman, watched her disappear into the gray mist. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just reached out and locked the door. Click. Meanwhile, the boardroom. The air in the boardroom had changed. 10 minutes ago, it smelled of fear and lemon polish. Now it smelled of something human: sweat, damp wool, coffee. The room was packed. Isabella Valmont stood at the head of the black glass table. She wasn't wearing her trench coat. She wasn't wearing her sunglasses. She looked exposed, but not vulnerable. The staff huddled near the door. They were terrified. In their experience, when management called everyone into a room, it meant mass layoffs. They held their breath, clutching their aprons and hats. Isabella looked at them. She saw the tired eyes. She saw the shoes held together with duct tape. She saw the posture of people who are used to apologizing for existing. Isabella reached up to her lapel. She unpinned the diamond swan brooch. The room went deadly silent. They watched the diamonds sparkle. That brooch was worth more than their collective annual salaries. Isabella placed the brooch on the table, face down. She turned away from the diamonds. She walked over to the silver coffee service station. She picked up a porcelain cup. She poured steaming black coffee into it. She picked up the sugar tongs. "Does anyone take sugar?" Isabella asked. Her voice wasn't the bank vault voice she had used with Victoria. It was softer, warmer. The staff stared at her. Was this a trick? A young woman in the back, a dishwasher with red, chapped hands, slowly raised a trembling hand. I do, ma'am. Isabella dropped 2 cubes into the cup. Plink, plink. She walked around the massive black table. She didn't make the dishwasher come to her. She walked to the back of the room. She held out the cup. The young woman wiped her wet hands on her apron, looking terrified. She took the cup. The china rattled in the saucer. "What is your name?" Isabella asked. "Chloe, ma'am." "Chloe," Isabella smiled. "Thank you for the coffee. It smells fresh." Chloe blinked. I made it an hour ago, ma'am. I can make a fresh pot." "It's perfect," Isabella said. Isabella turned to face the room. She didn't go back to the head of the table. She stood among them. "I know what you are thinking," Isabella said. Her voice was clear, filling the room without shouting. "You think I'm here to sell the furniture. You think I'm here to cut costs. You think you're going to lose your jobs." A murmur went through the crowd. Someone nodded. "You're right about one thing," Isabella said. "I am going to cut costs." The tension spiked, a collective intake of breath. "I'm cutting the floral budget," Isabella said. "Victoria spent $10,000 a month on orchids that die in 3 days." Isabella paused. "I'm cutting the executive lunch budget. Victoria spent $5,000 a month on catering for herself." Isabella took a step closer to the group. "That is $15,000 a month of waste." She looked at Arthur, who was standing by the door, still holding the master key like a holy relic. "Arthur," Isabella asked, "how much is the average hourly wage for the housekeeping staff?" Arthur cleared his throat. $12 an hour, ma'am, minimum wage." Isabella nodded. She looked at the faces in the room. "Not anymore." She walked back to the table. She picked up a remote control and pointed it at the wall screen. A spreadsheet appeared. It was simple, just names and numbers. "As of this morning," Isabella said, "the hourly minimum wage in this building is $20 an hour." The silence broke. It shattered. It wasn't a cheer. It was a gasp, a sound of disbelief. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hands. A man in a valet uniform grabbed his friend's arm. "Wait!" Isabella raised a hand. "I'm not finished." She looked at the spreadsheet. "I am also implementing a profit-sharing model. If the hotel does well, you do well. You are not staff. You are partners. If a guest comes back, it's not because of the chandelier. It's because the sheets were clean. It's because the coffee was hot. It's because the doorman smiled." She looked at Leo, the doorman, who had just slipped into the back of the room, dripping wet from locking the door. "You are the value of this asset," Isabella said fiercely. "Not the building. You." Arthur stepped forward. His eyes were wet. "Ms. Valmont," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Victoria. Ms. Sterling always said we were lucky to work here. She said we were replaceable." Isabella walked over to the diamond swan on the table. She picked it up. She held it up to the light. 10 years ago," Isabella said, staring at the ruby eye, "I was thrown out of this lobby because I was poor. I was told I was debris." She turned to face them. "I swore that if I ever got back in, I would burn the old ways to the ground." She pinned the brooch back onto her dress. It looked different now. It didn't look like a weapon anymore. It looked like a shield. "The Sterling Grand is dead," Isabella announced. She pointed to the window, to the storm outside, to the rusted S hanging by a thread. "Arthur, tomorrow morning I want that sign taken down." "Yes, ma'am," Arthur said, standing straighter than he had in years. "What should we put up instead?" Isabella smiled. It was the first time the smile reached her eye. "We'll get to that," she said. "But first, who knows how to make a decent sandwich? I haven't eaten since 2015. The room erupted, not with applause, but with laughter. Nervous, relieved, hopeful laughter. The ice had broken. The winter of Victoria Sterling was over. As the staff crowded around her, asking questions, shaking her hand, offering to make sandwiches, the camera pulls back. It moves through the glass window of the boardroom. It goes out into the rain. It floats down, 20 stories, down to the street, where a solitary figure holding a wet cardboard box turns the corner and vanishes into the gray city. Forgotten. 6 months later. The sun didn't just rise over the city, it seemed to pour itself onto the pavement like liquid gold. The rain that had soaked Act 1 and Act 7 was a distant memory. The concrete in front of the building was dry, warm, and clean. The weeds that had choked the driveway were gone. In their place, beds of purple lavender and white hydrangeas swayed in the gentle breeze. Swish, swish. The air didn't smell of exhaust fumes anymore. It smelled of life. A yellow taxi pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a black armored SUV. It was just a taxi. The back door opened. A family stepped out. A father wearing cargo shorts, a mother wrestling with a map, and a little girl holding a stuffed bear that had seen better days. They looked exhausted. They looked like normal people who had saved up for a vacation. Leo stood by the revolving doors. 6 months ago, Leo had been a statue. His job was to stare at a spot on the wall and ignore anyone who wasn't wearing a Rolex. Today, Leo wasn't staring at the wall. He stepped forward. He wasn't wearing the stiff, suffocating high-collar uniform of the Sterling era. He wore a breathable navy polo with a small logo on the chest. "Welcome," Leo said. He didn't recite a script. He smiled, and the smile reached his eyes. The little girl dropped her bear. It landed face down on the sidewalk, flump. The mother gasped, looking terrified as if she expected a siren to go off. "Oh no! Pick it up, sweetie, quickly! Don't make a mess!" Leo knelt. He didn't kneel to pick up a diamond. He knelt to pick up a dirty, well-loved teddy bear. He dusted off the bear's nose with his thumb. "I think he took a little tumble," Leo said, handing the bear back to the girl. "He must be tired from the flight." The girl giggled. The mother's shoulders dropped 3 inches as the tension left her body. "Thank you," the mother said, looking at Leo as if he were a superhero. We were worried this place might be too fancy for us. The reviews said it used to be strict." Leo stood up and winked. "It used to be a museum." "Ma'am," Leo said, opening the heavy glass door for them. "Now, it's a home." Cut to the lobby. The lobby was unrecognizable. The heavy velvet curtains that blocked the sun were gone. The floor-to-ceiling windows were naked, letting the natural light flood the marble floor. The marble itself seemed to glow. It wasn't cold anymore. And the sound, the silence of the tomb, was gone. In the corner where the dusty piano used to sit covered in a tarp, a young man was playing. It wasn't classical Mozart, it was soft, warm jazz. Plink, plink, hum. The smell of stale air and lemon polish had been replaced by the aroma of fresh ground coffee and vanilla. Isabella Valmont walked out of the elevator. She wasn't wearing the black executioner dress. She wasn't wearing the trench coat or the sunglasses. She wore a cream-colored linen suit. Her hair wasn't pulled back in a severe bun. It hung loose around her shoulders. She looked younger. She looked lighter. She walked to the front desk. Sarah, the receptionist, was on the phone. "Yes, Mr. Thompson," Sarah was saying, laughing softly. "We can absolutely put a dog bed in your room. What breed is he? A golden retriever? Oh, he's going to love the park next door." Sarah hung up and looked at Isabella. Occupancy is at 98%, Ms. Valmont, Sarah beamed. We're fully booked for the summer. Isabella smiled. I told you, Sarah. Call me Isabella. Old habits, Sarah grinned. Oh, Arthur's looking for you. He's in the ballroom. Isabella nodded and walked toward the ballroom. As she crossed the lobby, she saw something. A guest, a businessman in a rush, bumped into a small table. A cup of coffee spilled onto the white marble floor. Splash. The businessman froze. He looked around, panic in his eyes, expecting to be yelled at. Isabella didn't call for a janitor. She didn't snap her fingers. She walked over to the nearest service station, grabbed a towel, and walked to the man. She knelt down. I am so sorry, the man stammered. I was on my phone. I'll pay for the cleaning. Isabella wiped up the coffee. It's just coffee, Isabella said, looking up at him. Accidents happen. Are your shoes okay? Hot coffee can stain leather. The man stared at her. He didn't know she was the owner. He thought she was just the kindest person he had met all day. Yes, thank you. Go enjoy your meeting, Isabella said, standing up with the dirty towel. We'll handle the rest. She watched him go. He walked lighter. Isabella looked at the dirty towel in her hand. A brown stain. 10 years ago, a stain like this would have cost someone their job. Today, it was just a stain. Cut to the ballroom. The double doors were open. Arthur was standing in the middle of the room. He wasn't wearing his gray janitor jumpsuit. He was wearing a suit. It was off the rack, a little boxy in the shoulders, but his shirt was crisp white and his tie was straight. On his lapel, he wore a name tag, Arthur Henderson, Director of Operations. He was holding a clipboard directing a team of workers. Careful with that ladder, Arthur called out. His voice was strong. And let's make sure the safety rail is secure. We don't want anyone getting hurt. Isabella walked in. You look good in a suit, Arthur, she said. Arthur turned. He blushed slightly, smoothing his tie. I still feel like I'm playing dress-up, Ms. Valmont. Isabella. You're not playing, Isabella said. You're running the show. She looked up at the ceiling. The ugly water stain was gone. The fresco of the cherubs had been restored, but they hadn't just painted over it. They had installed a skylight. A circle of real blue sky looked down on them. The roof? Isabella asked. Fixed, Arthur said proudly, and we replaced the plumbing. The bones are good now. And the sign? Isabella asked. Arthur grinned. The sign is ready. The crew just finished the installation. Do you want to do the honors? Isabella took a deep breath. Let's go outside. Cut to the sidewalk. They stood on the sidewalk across the street. Isabella, Arthur, Leo, Sarah, Chloe, and Maria. Passers-by stopped to look. They sensed something was happening. High above the entrance, the rusted S and the faded letters of Sterling Grand were gone. In their place was a large object covered in a white canvas tarp. Arthur held a remote control. Ready? Arthur asked. Isabella touched her lapel. The diamond swan brooch was still there, but she didn't clutch it for safety anymore. She touched it like one touches an old scar that has finally faded to white. It was a part of her history, but it didn't define her future. Ready, Isabella whispered. Arthur pressed the button. Whirr! The canvas tarp slid away smoothly. The sun caught the new letters. They weren't gold. They weren't flashy. They were made of brushed steel, strong, simple, enduring. The crowd gasped. The name wasn't The Revenge. It wasn't The Palace. The sign read The Haven Est. 2024. And right next to the name, carved into the steel, was a small, elegant symbol, a swan. But the swan wasn't bowing its head. It was taking flight, wings spread, rising. "The haven," Maria whispered. "I like it." "It fits," Leo nodded. Isabella looked at the sign. Victoria Sterling had built a fortress to keep people out. Isabella Valmont had built a haven to bring people in. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Arthur. "You did it," Arthur said softly. "You saved it." "No," Isabella said, looking at the staff standing around her, the people who had survived the storm, the poverty, and the cruelty and had come out the other side kind. "We saved it." Epilogue. The reflection. Later that evening, the sun had set, painting the city in shades of purple and indigo. Isabella stood alone in the elevator. Ding! The doors closed. She was alone with the mirrors again. She looked at her reflection. 10 years ago, a girl had stood in this elevator when she was allowed to use it to deliver mail, crying because she didn't have enough money for lunch. She had hated the girl in the mirror. She had hated her weakness. Isabella stepped closer to the glass. She looked at her eyes. They weren't cold anymore. The ice had melted. She reached up and unpinned the diamond swan brooch. She held it in her palm. It was heavy, millions of dollars of carbon and pressure. It was beautiful, but it was just a thing. She put the brooch in her pocket. Then she reached into her other pocket. She pulled out a small, cheap object. It was the bus token Arthur had given Victoria. Isabella had found it on the table after Victoria left. She held the token up to the light. It was made of cheap metal. It was scratched. It was worth $2.50, but to Isabella, it shone brighter than the diamonds. Because the diamonds represented power, the bus token represented mercy, and mercy was the only currency that really mattered. The elevator slowed. Ding! The doors opened to the penthouse floor. But Isabella didn't step out into a lonely, empty apartment. Through the open doors of her suite, she could hear noise, laughter, clinking glasses. Arthur was there, and Sarah, and Leo. They were having a housewarming dinner. "Isabella, the pizza is here!" Arthur shouted from the living room, "and Leo is trying to juggle garlic knots." Isabella smiled. A true full smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. She squeezed the bus token in her hand, feeling its warmth. She stepped out of the elevator. She didn't walk like a queen. She didn't walk like a boss. She walked like a friend. Victoria Sterling built a castle of gold, but died in the cold. Isabella Valmont built a haven of kindness and found a home. True luxury isn't the brand on your bag, it's the grace in your heart. Because in the end, the only thing we take with us is how we made others feel. If Isabella's victory made you smile, hit that like button right now. And tell us in the comments,